Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, coming off the heels of what apparently was a very popular video I did yesterday, the live stream, where I did my own personal rankings of the presidents up through 1992. I thought I would dive into some simple history and talk about one of my favorite presidents to study, and that is Theodore Roosevelt. Just a fascinating character, probably one of the if not the toughest, certainly one of the two toughest presidents we've ever had. Definitely the guy you'd want to have your back in a bar fight. Just a fascinating character. There's so much to his story, and I know that the title of this video deals primarily with an incident that happened very near to the end of his life. But hopefully we'll get into a little bit more of his history because he's somebody I'd love to talk more about. So we're going to dive into simple history. The president that kept reading a speech after being shot. I'll put the link in the description below to the original video. Let's dive in and see what they have to say about him.
Teddy Roosevelt, the president that kept reading a speech after being shot.
Now, I should say right off the bat, and we've talked about this before when he has come up in other videos we've talked about, he did not like to be called Teddy. He didn't like the nickname. He preferred either Theodore or TR, but Teddy was a nickname that people used, but really never to his face.
1912. The famous American Theodore Teddy Roosevelt was the biggest hero of the Spanish-American War of 1898, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1906 for mediating an end to the Russo-Japanese War, and was the inspiration for the teddy bear toy.
So think about that just for a second. This is a man who both won the Nobel Peace Prize and also the Medal of Honor for heroism. Now, the Medal of Honor actually did not happen during his lifetime. It was awarded many years later. I want to say it was under the presidency of Bill Clinton that Theodore Roosevelt received the Medal of Honor. His son, Theodore Roosevelt Jr., actually got his Medal of Honor first. Theodore Roosevelt Jr. received his Medal of Honor for actions on D-Day. He came ashore at Utah Beach and very famously said, "We'll start the war from here," when they realized that they had actually landed several miles off of where they were supposed to land, which may have actually worked to their advantage. But he was the highest ranking officer to land in the initial assault waves on D-Day. Assistant Division Commander, performed admirably that day, died a few weeks later of a heart attack right after he had been given a division command. And Theodore Roosevelt's son Quentin, who was his youngest son, was shot down in July of 1918 as a fighter pilot during World War I. They're actually buried, Quentin and Theodore Roosevelt Jr. are buried side by side in the Normandy American Cemetery.
One time he found himself in a bar fight when a cowboy was shooting wildly at the room, scaring the customers. The cowboy called Roosevelt Four Eyes in reference to his famous spectacles and followed Teddy around with his guns. Roosevelt hit him in the jaw with his left and right fists. Then the cowboy's guns went off and he hit his head on the bar, knocking him unconscious. Another time, Roosevelt's boat was stolen. Him and his friends built a boat from scratch in 3 days to hunt down the thieves. They tracked them down along the river while in temperatures as low as 0 degrees Fahrenheit. When they caught the thieves, Roosevelt roughed up and captured the men and brought them back to be arrested. It's said that to pass the time on the journey back, he read poetry to the dangerous bandits.
I'm telling you, the fact that a major motion picture has not been made about this man is a crime. I highly recommend, if you want to learn more about his story and about the story of Franklin Roosevelt, Ken Burns, the same guy who did the fantastic Civil War documentary series, and he has another one about baseball that's really good as well. He did one called The Roosevelts, and it mainly focuses on Theodore and Franklin, who were distant cousins, but also on Theodore's niece, Eleanor, who married Franklin. And it's just a fascinating look into a fascinating character. There's so much to his story when he spent time out west. His mother and his first wife died the same day. And that day in his journal, he wrote, "The light has gone out of my life." And that's all it says on that entry that day. And think about it. He lost his wife and his mother. You can imagine what that did to the man.
Roosevelt was elected Vice President of the United States in 1901, but just over 6 months later, he became the 26th president when the current president, William McKinley, was assassinated after being shot twice by Polish-American anarchist Leon Czolgosz.
So his politics is fascinating as well, the rise that he has. He starts out, I think his first elected office is as a New York State Assemblyman. He only serves, I think, 2 years in the State Assembly. But a year into his term, he is chosen to be the Republican leader, the minority leader in the House. I mean, that doesn't happen very often, that you're a year into being an assemblyman and you get chosen to be the minority leader. That tells you the kind of influence, the kind of character and charisma that this guy had. He goes and fights. He's the assistant secretary of the Navy when the Spanish-American War breaks out, which is interesting because Franklin Roosevelt, his cousin, also served as assistant secretary of the Navy around the time of World War I. And so Theodore Roosevelt leaves his post in the Navy Department and raises this regiment of soldiers they call the Rough Riders, wins the victory at San Juan Hill. That's what he eventually got his Medal of Honor for. Comes home like a month later and immediately gets himself elected governor of New York. He serves as governor of New York for just under 2 years. Before becoming vice president, and then he becomes president. He's still, to this day, the youngest man to ever be president of the United States. I think he was 42 when he became president. So just fascinating how just kind of things just happen really, really fast for him. And that tells you a little bit about the guy.
At 42, Roosevelt became the youngest president in the nation's history. When the U.S. president refused to shoot a bear cub on a 1902 hunting trip, a toy maker named a stuffed bear after Roosevelt. Soon, the teddy bear fad swept the American nation. Roosevelt was also a mixed martial artist in jiu-jitsu, judo, and boxing. He loved boxing, and he continued to do it even when he reached the White House. He would often challenge professional boxers to hit him in the jaw as hard as possible, and wouldn't hesitate to then knock them back.
And I believe, and they may mention this, and I hate when that happens when I say something and then it happens right after, because I haven't seen this video yet. I believe in one of those boxing matches in the White House, he actually got blinded in one of his eyes because of a punch.
One day, Roosevelt challenged Colonel Dan T. Meade, a military aide at the White House, to a boxing match in the White House gym. Roosevelt demanded a tough fight. In the fight, Meade's punch landed on Roosevelt's left eye, damaging blood vessels and making him blind in that eye. After this, he continued fighting in jiu-jitsu and judo.
I don't know how you can't like this guy, and just, you can see me smiling as they're telling these stories. He's a cool dude. I mean, and on top of that, he was a very good president too. He did some incredibly important things for the country that shouldn't be overlooked in all of the other stuff about his life.
Roosevelt was successfully re-elected for a second term as president in 1904 and served until 1909. He then decided not to try to be re-elected for another time, as he felt it was time for a younger man to take over.
Which is funny because he was still one of the youngest men. I mean, he's only 80 at this, or 80. He's only 50 at this point, so he's still fairly young. And his hand-picked successor is William Howard Taft, who then takes the country and the Republican Party in a direction that TR doesn't like, which is why he decides to challenge him 4 years later.
But by the time of the next presidential elections in 1912, he had become disillusioned about how his party, the Republicans, were running the country. So he stood as the presidential candidate for a newly formed Progressive Party, which was often referred to as the Bull Moose Party.
And it shouldn't be overlooked that first he tried to get the Republican nomination. He ran against William Howard Taft to get the nomination, didn't get it, and that's when he ran third party. Unfortunately, as often is the case when that happens, he helped split the Republican vote, and that opened the door for Woodrow Wilson to get elected in 1912.
It got its nickname because Roosevelt was often described himself as having the strength and vigor of a bull moose. His running for a third term as a president was considered controversial because he intended to break the American tradition of two-term presidencies.
Now, and it's important to note, he only got elected once. He was elected as vice president, but he served almost all of McKinley's second term.
And while campaigning in Milwaukee in the state of Wisconsin in hope of being elected president once more, Roosevelt nearly suffered the same fate as McKinley. He was about to give a speech when John Fleming Schrank, a Bavarian-born saloon keeper, attempted to kill Roosevelt by shooting him with a revolver. The bullet struck Roosevelt in his chest, but his life was saved as the bullet was slowed down considerably as it went in first through the heavy overcoat he was wearing, then the steel-reinforced eyeglass case in his breast pocket, and finally the 50-page copy of the speech he was about to give, before finally becoming lodged in his chest.
And I believe it stayed there the rest of his life.
The crowd screamed in panic, but Elbert Martin, secretary of the president and an ex-football player, leapt from his car and tackled Schrank to the ground. Soon, former Rough Riders, bodyguards, and policemen were upon the assassin and began hitting him. Roosevelt stumbled but then straightened himself and reassured the audience with a beaming smile. He turned to his aide saying, "He pinked me, Harry." The crowd demanded blood and for Schrank to be killed. It was only...
And interesting to note, kind of the parallels, a few years earlier when McKinley was shot, as McKinley goes to the ground and the men are doing the same to Leon Czolgosz. They start beating him up and they're kind of being real rough with him. McKinley actually asked them to go easy on him. It's just kind of fascinating to see that, these are people that are supporters. So obviously they're angry when this happens. And so they're going to start beating the crap out of this guy.
Only Roosevelt who seemed to be calm and wanted to prevent this, shouting, "Don't hurt him. Bring him here. I want to see him." Roosevelt then asked the shooter, "What did you do it for?" When there was no answer, he said, "Oh, what's the use? Turn him over to the police." Feeling the bullet hole in his chest, Roosevelt coughed 3 times. As an experienced hunter and anatomist, he concluded that the lack of blood being coughed up meant that the bullet had not reached his lung. Roosevelt, feeling he was not seriously injured, insisted to the doctor that he was going to give his speech. The speech lasted for 84 minutes.
The speech with a bullet hole through it because he's just been shot right through the speech. Dude's got a bullet in his chest and he speaks for 84 minutes. It wasn't like he finished his 5-minute remarks and then headed off to the hospital. Dude spoke for over an hour after this happened.
Like the blood that could be clearly seen staining his shirt. He started the speech by saying, "I don't know whether you fully understand that I've just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose." Then, when his speech was finally over, he allowed himself to be taken to the hospital, where the doctors decided it would be more dangerous to remove the bullet, and instead left it lodged in his chest muscle.
Which, had they done that for James Garfield 30 years earlier, Garfield would have survived. Hopefully they learned their lesson. I mean, obviously these aren't the same doctors, but hopefully a lot has been learned in those 30 years.
Where it remained for the rest of his life. Schrank, the would-be assassin, was later to claim he was told to kill Roosevelt by the ghost of the former President McKinley, who came to him in a dream. Roosevelt recovered quickly, but was not successful in his bid to be re-elected as president, and later devoted much time to being an explorer as well as a successful author. He died in his sleep from a blood clot on January 6, 1919, at the age of 60.
Yeah, and he was actually contemplating another run for president in 1920 when he died. Pretty young guy still. I mean, he was only 60 when he died. He certainly could have run again, and who knows what would have happened. Warren Harding ended up winning that election.
As for Schrank, at his trial he was deemed insane and spent the rest of his life in a mental institution. He died of bronchitis in 1943 at the age of 67.
So that, like I said, I highly encourage you to take some more time to learn about him, to read about him. It's a fascinating story. There's so much more to it, and I'm sure we'll talk about Theodore Roosevelt some more. But in the meantime, check out the original video, give them a like and a comment. Do the same here on this video. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. We'll see you again tomorrow with another video. Thanks for watching.